The heavy steel door of the Georgia State Penitentiary slams shut with a sound that is less a noise and more a physical force, a deep, resonant clang that echoes down cold, concrete corridors and vibrates in the very marrow of your bones. For Arthur Jenkins, that sound was the soundtrack to 23 years of his life, the percussive beat marking every sunrise and sunset in a world bleached of color and hope. Now, at 71 years old, his body was failing him, a worn-out engine held together by little more than regret and state-mandated health care. His heart, a tired, faltering muscle, was giving up. Seated on the thin, unforgiving mattress of his prison cot that felt more like a slab of stone, Arthur made a decision. His final request wasn't for a last meal or a meeting with a chaplain. It was for a single visitor. His son, David. A son whose face had faded from a living memory to a ghostly photograph in his mind. A son he hadn't seen since the day the courtroom door closed and the bailiff led him away. He just wanted to look him in the eye one last time, to rasp out an apology for a lifetime of failures before his heart shuddered to a permanent stop. It was a simple, final wish, but the meeting that was granted would not bring peace. It would crack open a decades-old coffin, unleashing a truth more bloody and sinister than anyone could have imagined. The air in the visitation room was a stale cocktail of industrial bleach, sour coffee, and the faint metallic tang of human despair. Arthur shuffled in, his orange jumpsuit hanging like a shroud on his gaunt frame. The shackles on his wrists were cold and heavy, and his hands, gnarled by arthritis, trembled as he reached for the telephone receiver on his side of the thick, scarred plexiglass. He had practiced the words 1,000 times in his head. "I'm sorry, David, for everything, for not being the man you needed, for the father I was, for the life I took from us." His eyes, milky with age, strained to focus on the figure already seated on the other side. He tried to map the silhouette of this grown man onto the memory of the 16-year-old boy, all awkward limbs and a defiant scowl he'd last seen. But when the man picked up the receiver, Arthur's rehearsed speech died in his throat. This wasn't David. The man was younger, maybe in his early 30s, with a calm demeanor and eyes that held a deep, intelligent empathy, currently clouded with a confusion that mirrored Arthur's own. "No, sir," the man said, his voice gentle but firm through the scratchy phone line. "My name is Ben Carter. I'm an investigator with the Georgia Innocence Project. Your lawyer contacted us. We've been looking into your case." The world tilted on its axis for Arthur. The breath left his lungs in a silent whoosh. This wasn't his son. This was a stranger. A hot, paternal anger flared in his chest. This was his last wish, his final, desperate grasp at redemption, and it had been hijacked. "Where is David?" Arthur demanded, his voice gaining a raspy strength it hadn't possessed in years. "I asked for my son. They promised me my son." Ben Carter leaned closer to the glass, his expression one of profound sympathy but also unwavering seriousness. "I know, Mr. Jenkins, and we will try to find him. I promise you that. But first, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. The reason your lawyer called me is because we found something we need to ask you about." He unzipped a worn leather satchel and pulled out a thin, faded file, placing it against the glass. It was an evidence report from 1999, the year Arthur's life ended. Arthur's tired eyes scanned the familiar document, the convenience store robbery on the corner of Elm and Fifth, the one where the clerk, a 60-year-old man named Frank Abbott, was pistol-whipped with such brutality he was left with permanent brain damage, the one that Arthur, a desperate heroin addict who'd been in the wrong place at the worst possible time, had confessed to after 18 hours of relentless interrogation, a confession coerced by a detective who promised he'd make it easier on him if he just signed the paper. "This is the initial statement from Frank Abbott," Ben said, his finger pointing to a specific line through the glass. "Taken in the ambulance by a paramedic. He was fading in and out of consciousness, but they wrote down what he said. He described the man who hit him. He said, and I quote, 'He had a snake, a blue snake on his neck. Arthur's blood, already sluggish, seemed to freeze solid in his veins. He remembered that detail. Detective Miles, the bulldog of a man who'd interrogated him, had mentioned it. A fact never released to the press, a piece of evidence used to hammer home his guilt. "They know it was you, Arthur. The victim saw the tattoo on your neck. Just tell us the truth." "But you don't have any tattoos, Mr. Jenkins," Ben said softly, his eyes locked on Arthur's, seeing the dawning horror within them. "We checked your intake photos from that night, your medical records. Not a single one. Certainly not a blue snake on your neck." The humming of the fluorescent lights above swelled into a deafening roar. For 23 years, Arthur had worn the identity of the monster who committed that crime. He had believed Detective Miles. He had believed his own worthless, coerced confession. The guilt had become a part of him, a second skin of shame he could never shed. He had accepted his punishment because, on some deep, broken level, he felt he deserved it for the life he'd led, for being a bad husband, a failed father, a junkie. He had never, not once, questioned the facts. He was guilty because they said he was. And now, this stranger with the kind eyes was handing him a key to a door he thought had been welded shut forever. "The detective," Arthur stammered, the memories flooding back, sharp and painful. He said they knew. He said it was me." "He was wrong, Mr. Jenkins," Ben said, his voice gaining a new fierce intensity. "Or he lied. The clerk's description was thrown out later because the court deemed him an unreliable witness due to his head injury. But his initial statement was the truth. Someone with a very distinctive tattoo committed that crime. And it wasn't you." What followed was a whirlwind, a blur of motions and DNA tests, of technology that didn't exist in 1999 being applied to old evidence. The bloody flashlight used to crush Frank Abbott's skull had been sitting in an evidence locker for over 2 decades. Arthur's DNA wasn't on it, but someone else's was. A match was found in the CODIS database. Carl the Snake Righetti, a small-time thug with a long and violent rap sheet. And in his most recent booking photo, clear as day, was a faded blue cobra tattoo, its scaly body slithering up the side of his neck. The walls of Arthur's world, built brick by brick from shame and acceptance, didn't just crack, they exploded. The frail old man in the jumpsuit was gone, replaced by a wronged man, a fighter he thought had died decades ago. Ben and his team worked tirelessly, and a judge, faced with the incontrovertible DNA evidence and the proof of a coerced confession, vacated Arthur's sentence. The day Arthur walked out of those prison gates, the heavy door closing behind him for the last time, he didn't cheer or cry. He just stood on the sun-warmed sidewalk, feeling the heat on his papery skin, breathing air that didn't smell of bleach and misery. He was free. But his journey wasn't over. With Ben's help, he found his son. David was living 3 states away, a mechanic with a wife and 2 young children of his own. The meeting was arranged in a quiet green park. Arthur saw him from a distance, a strong, quiet man with Arthur's own eyes, watching him with a wariness that spoke of years of hurt. Arthur walked toward him, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his fragile ribs. He had no right to ask for anything. "David," he said, his voice quiet, stripped bare. I know I don't deserve your time. I just needed you to know. I didn't do it. I didn't commit that crime. I'm so sorry for everything else, for all the years I missed, for not being the father you needed." David looked at him for a long, excruciating minute, his gaze taking in the old, frail man before him, so different from the angry, broken addict he remembered. The silence was a chasm filled with 23 years of absence. Then David nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He didn't embrace him, not yet. That would come later, with time. But he said the words that meant more to Arthur than any judge's ruling. "I believe you, Dad." It wasn't a perfect Hollywood ending. Their relationship was a delicate, fragile thing they would have to build from the rubble. But it was a start. Arthur got to meet his grandchildren. He got to sit at a family dinner table. He got to live his remaining years not as inmate number 78 thought to 432, but as Arthur Jenkins. A flawed man, yes. A man who had made mistakes, absolutely, but an innocent one. His story is a stark reminder that the truth has a tenacity all its own, that it can lie dormant for decades, waiting for the right moment, the right question, to burst forth into the light. Arthur's last wish wasn't for freedom, it was for forgiveness. But in seeking that forgiveness, he stumbled into a bloody secret and found his freedom waiting on the other side. He learned that sometimes the walls that hold us captive are built not of steel and concrete, but of lies we were too broken to question. And in the end, the key to his prison cell wasn't made of metal, but of a single, forgotten detail. A blue snake tattoo, silently slithering through the darkness for 23 years, waiting to strike at the truth. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.